so I've saved my JPEG file with the satellite image, which I'll just show you now. So I'm just going to open that with Photoshop. Oops, not with that one. Oops. Sorry. Open it with Photo Viewer or something, so you can see simply what I've captured. And that's not a bad view to have actually, because it has the street overlays on top of the satellite image. And so now back into AutoCAD, I'm going to make a new file, but I'm going to click on the little down arrow there next to templates and just make sure that it's set to AutoCAD ISO, not AutoCAD, because AutoCAD ISO, you probably know, is the metric template. AutoCAD is, well, it tells you right there, feet and inches. Not everyone realizes that. That one, it does work for metric if you change a couple of things once you open it, but why not just use the metric one to start with, is what I think. So here you can see AutoCAD ISO. ISO is International Standards Organization, set up from the get-go to work as metric. Okay, so now I want to bring in the image, but I'm going to make a layer for that first. So here I'm going to click on Layer Properties. There's my Layer Manager. I'll just move that down so that you can see that a bit more clearly, and I'll make it a bit larger just by dragging on the border there. And then I'm going to click on the New Layer button, and we'll make a layer called Image. And I'll just change the color to something different. Whatever you like, as long as it's different to the original default white. Then I'm going to set that to be the current layer by just double clicking on the icon to the left of the name. The button up here does the same thing. And I can close my layer manager, and you can see image is now my current layer. And so now I'm going to go to the Insert tab and then click Attach. So then you need to make sure the file of type is set to all image files, and then browse to where your file is saved. So I'm going to go to the common subject folder on the P drive, Construction 2, and there's my JPEG file. Click Open. Now, I'm just going to go to Show Details so that you can see what AutoCAD is going to make this. All right, so the size there is very small. Right, so to make my life easier, I know I'm going to have to scale that up. So I'm going to leave this option here turned on, specify on screen. I'm going to leave that ticked for insertion point. That's really important. Well, actually, for this one, it wouldn't matter. Sorry, no, we can turn that off. So I can leave that for the first one set to the origin. But that's up to you. In some cases, it might make more sense to click to place your image somewhere else on your page. Okay, so think about the options you need. The one I definitely want to turn off, though, I'm going to turn this one off, but that's optional. This one, though, you definitely want to turn off. We don't want to scale it using the mouse, and that's what specify on screen means. So instead, I'm going to turn that option off and type in a scale factor, and I'm going to make it 10,000. That may not even be enough, but it might be okay as a starting point. Okay, so I'm going to make it a lot larger than it would be initially, because again, I'm going to scale it up. I don't want to have to scale it all that much, as much as it would be if it was set to 1. Okay, so I'm just going to click OK, and you can see there's my image. So that's 10,000 times the original size. Imagine if I left it set to 1, it'd be down here, it'd be about that big. So that's why I like to scale it up as the first step before I do the next step, which is to scale it to the size it needs to be. Okay, and to do that, I need to use this scale bar. Right, now, I'm always in two minds when I measure off these scale bars on maps, because I'm not sure if they do the measuring the old way or the digital way. Okay, so when I say the old way, I mean the way it used to be done when people drew with pen and ink, and that was to measure from the outside of the line. Now, I think it was always a pretty silly approach, but that's the way they did it. And so they would measure from, in some cases, from the outside to the outside. But the reason I think it was always a pretty silly approach is because you never know which side to measure from with things like this. With the outside of a wall, it's obvious. But with something like this, it's never really obvious which side you're meant to measure from. And that's why with computers, they had to be a little bit more consistent. And so it's always the center of the line. And if you think about it, that should have always been the approach. But just be careful when you're measuring off a hand-drawn drawing, even if it's been scanned in, you might be measuring from the wrong point if you measure from the center. Because this is done digitally, I'm going to assume, and I usually do assume, that it's measuring center to center. But again, you never know, because you get some people working with computers who still have been trained the old way. Okay, so using the measure tool, you can then measure it from the center of the line. I'm going to zoom in to just try and get as close as I can to that exact center point. And then coming across, I'm going to turn ortho on as well so that I'm measuring in a straight line. And then again zoom in to get as close as I can just by eye to the center. And so there's my distance, 443.1528. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you the magic formula, which you should always be able to use to scale anything. And that is, when you scale something, you scale it by the size you want it to be over the size it is. Right? So just remember that formula, it will work, trust me, every time you want to scale something. Right, so the size you want it to be over the size it is. I came up with that formula by myself, and I'm sure I'm not the first one. And it is something that we were doing with photocopiers years ago, but of course works just well with computers. And so I'm going to select that image, go back to the Home tab, and then click the Scale button. And now type in 0,0 for the base point. So I'm measuring from the origin. It doesn't really matter where you scale from. It wouldn't affect the size. It just means that it's going to scale from this corner here up and to the right. So it's just going to affect the direction that it scales, but it won't affect the actual outcome in terms of the size. Okay, so I'm going to just make sure I've given a base point, and then it will ask for the scale factor. So what did I say it was? The formula, size you want it to be over the size it is. Okay, so what's the size we want it to be? Exactly, spot on, yeah, 20. We want it to be 20 metres, 20,000 millimetres. Okay, so that's the size we want it to be. What about the size it is? 443.1528. Now, if you want to be really accurate, you can convert that into a larger number. But with AutoCAD, you can't type in decimals as a fraction. It's just one of those limitations. You might have an idea if you've done maths why you can't do that. So I'm just going to use the number 443. I'm not going to bother shifting the decimal for this one. And we can just repeat the process if it's not accurate enough. Okay, so yeah, it just means you scaled it by less. So just use that number. Okay, so